I remember the summer of 2003 like it happened last week. The smell of cut grass on the field, the bus idling just outside the high school gym, the sound of my brother, Lucas, laughing with his teammates as they loaded their gear, fresh off the biggest win in Mill Creek High's history, the state championship. I was 15 at the time, too young to be on the team, but old enough to worship them. They were gods in our little town. Lucas was the star forward, and after that final game, his face was plastered on every storefront and diner wall from Main Street to the county line. He never made it home. None of them did. The official story said the team's bus vanished sometime after leaving the stadium in Carson City. Somewhere along the stretch of Highway 50, the loneliest road in America, all contact was lost. No calls, no radio signal, just gone. For years, conspiracy theories bloomed like weeds. Some folks swore they were kidnapped. Others talked about a cult, a revenge killing, even aliens, ridiculous stuff. The sheriff's department searched for weeks. Helicopters, dogs, divers, nothing. After a while, people stopped asking questions. The town grieved, built a plaque, and tried to move on. But I never did. 18 years later, I got a call that changed everything. It was late September 2021. I was living in Reno, working as a mechanic, trying my best to outrun ghosts I hadn't buried. I still couldn't drive near rivers without my hands shaking. Then the phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. It was the new sheriff in Mill Creek, young guy, honest, said he had news and that I needed to come home. They'd found the bus. Buried beneath the Pine Creek River, about 10 miles off the old state route. A fisherman had noticed something metallic sticking out from the riverbed after the drought dropped the waterline by 15 feet. At first, they thought it was just debris. Then they found the Mill Creek Wolves logo on the side faded, but still there. The bus had been there the whole time. How did no one see it? How did the sonar scans miss it? I drove back that same night, hands clenched on the wheel the entire ride. When I got there, the area was taped off, flashing red and blue lights spinning against the dark trees. And there it was, rusted, half-crushed, but unmistakable, the bus that took my brother away. That wasn't even the most disturbing part. They found bones. Not 16 sets like they expected, just 8. Where were the others? The sheriff wouldn't let me get close, but I saw enough. The side of the bus had a massive gash, like it had been forced open from the inside. And inside, carved into the metal near the emergency exit, were 3 words that have haunted me every night since. We weren't alone. I haven't slept much since. I don't know what happened out there, but something or someone made sure only half the team stayed in that river. I've spent the last few weeks going through old files, newspaper clippings, my brother's journals. And the more I dig, the more I realize the truth was never buried in water. It was buried in silence. I'm going back to where it started. Back to Mill Creek High. Because someone still remembers what happened that night. And they've been waiting for me to start asking questions. The first thing I did when I got back to Mill Creek High was walk straight into the old gym. It hadn't changed much. Same wooden bleachers with initials carved into them. Same scoreboard flickering half-broken numbers. Even the old trophy case stood proudly at the entrance, holding dust-covered plaques and team photos, including the 2003 Wolves, frozen forever in black frames and forced smiles. I stood there for a long time, eyes locked on my brother's face. He was front row, ball in hand, that cocky half-smile on his lips. Lucas had always been like that, confident, loud, full of life, the kind of kid everyone gravitated toward. Looking at that photo now, I couldn't help but ask myself, what really happened to you? Principal Darnell found me not long after. She'd been a teacher back in the day, and she recognized me immediately. Ethan, you look just like your brother. I forced a smile. Everyone says that. We talked for a while. She was hesitant at first, clearly aware of the media frenzy already circling the school like vultures. But when I told her what I found etched into the bus, we weren't alone, her expression changed. She didn't look surprised. She looked scared. There were always rumors, she said, after the disappearance, things we weren't supposed to talk about, things that didn't make sense. Like what? I pressed. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the gym doors. You need to talk to Coach Randall. Is he still alive? She nodded slowly. Retired, lives just outside of town now. He hasn't set foot in this school since they disappeared. I thanked her and stepped into the boys' locker room. That place was a tomb. The smell of old sweat and mildew clung to the walls like it had been trapped there for decades. The lockers were still labeled with names I remembered: Price, Calhoun, Wells, Turner, Lucas. I stood in front of his, number 9, and pulled the metal door open. Empty. Except for one thing. A small envelope, yellowed and curled at the edges, tucked behind a loose piece of metal near the back. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, grainy and dark, but unmistakably taken on the bus. The boys were all there, crowded into the seats, making faces, flashing peace signs. But there was something else. In the back of the frame, barely visible but definitely there, a silhouette. It was tall, too tall to be one of the players, standing in the aisle, no face, just darkness, like someone or something had been riding with them. I staggered back, nearly dropping the photo. My breath caught in my throat. That photo was taken on the night they vanished. It had to be. How did it get here? And why now? Before I could process it, I heard the faintest creak behind me. I spun around. No one. Just the sound of the distant gym door swinging shut, and the flicker of overhead lights buzzing louder than they should have. I left the locker room fast. My pulse was hammering, heart racing, palms clammy. This wasn't just grief or trauma playing tricks. Something was wrong here, something that had waited almost 2 decades to resurface. I drove out to Coach Randall's place just before sunset. His house sat at the edge of the woods, the kind of place people go when they want to be forgotten. The porch was falling apart, and an old truck sat rusting in the driveway. I knocked twice. Nothing. Then the door creaked open, and the man who answered looked like he hadn't slept in years. Ethan, he rasped, squinting into the light. I figured someone would come sooner or later. I didn't even have to ask the question. He stepped aside and let me in. They never told you, did they? He said, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. No one told you what we saw that night. I sat down slowly. Tell me everything. He looked me in the eyes, and for the first time since I returned to Mill Creek, I saw real fear, deep-rooted, bone-deep fear. And then he said the words that flipped everything upside down. Half the boys wanted to turn back that night. The other half, they weren't themselves anymore. Coach Randall's living room smelled like old wood, damp flannel, and something sour beneath it all like fear soaked into the walls. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, hands trembling so hard the ice clinked like tiny bells. I didn't ask for one. I wanted answers, not numbing. He sat across from me, eyes heavy with something he'd clearly carried too long. They weren't themselves anymore, I repeated. What do you mean by that? He stared at his drink for a long while before speaking. I didn't drive the bus that night, he said. That was Lou Simmons, our usual driver, Vietnam vet, reliable, quiet. But about 30 miles outside Carson City, we hit this heavy fog real thick, like concrete in the air. Lou radioed it in, said we were slowing down. That's the last time anyone heard from us. I was recording him at that point. I didn't care if it was legal. I needed to remember every word. There was a rest stop we used to hit on long trips, real old, off the main road right next to Pine Creek. We pulled in not because we needed to, but because the boys were acting strange, loud, agitated, not like after a win, more like a panic attack brewing in a pressure cooker. He paused, took a long sip. Lucas, he said, voice softer. Your brother, he wasn't scared, he was angry, said we needed to keep going. That stopping was a mistake. He was pacing the aisle, barking at the others. I'd never seen him like that. That didn't sound like Lucas at all. I stepped off the bus to calm Lou down, Coach continued. That's when I saw the figure. He looked at me, eyes glassy. 6'5", maybe taller, just standing there, in the fog. No face I could make out, but something about the way it stood, like it didn't belong in this world. My body stiffened. Did anyone else see it? I asked. He nodded slowly. A few of the boys did, and that's when everything fell apart. According to Coach Randall, within minutes of stopping, the team splintered. Some of the players started screaming, others tried to open the emergency exit. Lucas punched one of his own teammates. One kid tried to climb out the window. It was chaos. Coach tried to call for help, but the radio had gone dead. Then, just like that, silence. When I got back on the bus, he said, half the seats were empty. And the others, I asked. They were sitting there, still as statues, eyes straight ahead, not moving, not blinking. The blood drained from my face. I yelled, shook them, nothing. Then Lou turned the key and the bus started rolling. Coach said he tried to stop it, physically tried to grab the wheel, but something was wrong. The engine shouldn't have started. He couldn't slow it down. The kids weren't responding. Lou never spoke another word. The bus rolled into the fog and disappeared, with Coach standing alone at the rest stop, covered in bruises and scratches he couldn't explain. The next morning, he reported what happened, but no one believed him. I told the sheriff everything. He wrote down 2 sentences, then looked me in the eye and said, "You were never on that bus." Coach was forced into early retirement. No formal investigation, no disciplinary action, just silence. "They covered it up," he said bitterly. "Sheriff Mason, the school board, the state, everyone. I never saw any of the parents again. They buried the truth right along with those boys." I sat back in my chair, throat tight. "8 skeletons in the bus," I whispered. "Where's the rest of the team?" Coach let out a shaky breath. If they didn't die in that river, then someone or something took them somewhere else. I showed him the Polaroid I found in the locker. His face turned ghost white. This shouldn't exist," he muttered. He stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a tattered envelope. Inside were dozens of old photographs, reports, even student records. He handed me one photo that made my stomach drop. Same bus, same boys. And in the background, the same figure. It had been following them long before that night. I left Coach's house just before midnight. The air was cold, heavy, the kind of cold that sinks into your skin and doesn't leave. As I reached my car, he shouted one last thing from the porch. "If you're going to keep digging, Ethan, don't trust anyone who tells you they were there." That night I dreamt of the river, of empty seats, and a face I couldn't see, watching me through the rearview mirror. I couldn't sleep. After leaving Coach Randall's house, I parked outside Mill Creek's old diner, the one with the flickering neon sign that never quite got fixed. I sat in the car, engine running, replaying every word he said. They weren't themselves anymore. Don't trust anyone who says they were there. I opened the envelope he gave me. Dozens of documents, school memos, yearbook scans. There were photos of the team from earlier that season, nothing unusual, but tucked in the back was a list of the final travel roster for the 2003 state finals. I counted the names, 16. Then I looked again. 17. There was one name I didn't recognize, Wesley Kerr. That might not sound strange at first, a backup goalie, a last-minute sub, but I was obsessed with that team. I knew every starter, every benchwarmer. Wesley Kerr wasn't one of them. I pulled out my phone, searched Mill Creek High records, team photos, newspaper clippings. Nothing, no mention of him. Not in the yearbooks, not in the archives. It was like he had never existed. Except his name was typed, not handwritten, on that official school roster, wedged right between Lucas and Marcus Tilling. Who the hell was Wesley Kerr? I had to know. At 2:00 a.m., I drove to the county clerk's office. My mom used to work there, and I still remembered where they kept the archived student files. I wasn't proud of it, but I knew how to get in without tripping the alarm. Small-town secrets never really go away, they just get dustier. Inside, it smelled like cardboard and mold. I pulled the 2002 and 2003 student files, scanned the Ks, nothing, no Wesley Kerr. Then I searched enrollment forms, library cards, disciplinary reports, anything. I found one thing. A visitor log dated 2 weeks before the state finals. A man named William Kerr had signed in to speak with the school board. His reason, transfer petition for son, urgent athletic eligibility. The principal's signature was next to it, and scribbled in red pen at the bottom. Approved to be kept confidential due to sensitive circumstances. My fingers froze on the paper. This wasn't just a student slipping through the cracks. He had been deliberately hidden. Why? And what did he have to do with the team's disappearance? I scanned the rest of the log. Something else caught my eye. The name Sheriff Mason appeared twice that week, and under the reason for his visit, locker room incident report, resolved quietly. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I knew where I had to go next. The old archives at Mill Creek Gazette. If anyone kept records of what the town buried, it'd be in the paper's storage. At 7:00 a.m., I knocked on the back door of the Gazette. Dave Larkin, the same editor who ran it back in 2003, opened the door, squinting like I'd woken him from the dead. "Ethan," he rasped, "Jesus, you look like hell." "Thanks," I said. "Can I come in?" He let me inside. The place was a skeleton, 2 desks, a fax machine, a coffee pot that hadn't seen ground since Obama's first term. Dave poured me stale coffee and sat across from me. I assume you're here about the bus. I nodded. You ran the story back then, but you never ran the full list of passengers. He leaned back, arms crossed. I was told not to. By who? He didn't answer, just pointed toward the back room. Third filing cabinet, bottom drawer, 2003 issues. If you find something, it's yours, but I never gave it to you. The drawer groaned as I pulled it open. Inside were old manila folders, yellowed pages, rough drafts, things that never made it to print. I found it, a draft titled, 17th Passenger Raises Questions. The article had been written by a young intern, dated 2 days after the disappearance. It listed Wesley Kerr as the only student whose name wasn't officially confirmed by police. The piece detailed that his family had no listed address, no phone records, and no local ties, but the real punch came in the last paragraph. Several students reported seeing Wesley in the locker room the night before the trip, but claimed his behavior was erratic. When asked to describe him, none of the students could agree on his face. I read that line twice. None could agree on his face. I took a photo of the article and left. Back in the car, I thought of the silhouette in the Polaroid, the one standing at the back of the bus, and I asked myself the question I'd been trying to avoid since I came home. What if Wesley Kerr was never a student at all? What if he wasn't supposed to be on that bus? What if he was the reason half of them never came back? The question kept circling in my head like a buzzard. What if there were never just 16? The Polaroid, the locker room incident, Wesley Kerr's name, the fog, the missing bodies. Nothing was adding up unless there was something or someone else, something no one had the courage to name. By noon, I was back at the site by Pine Creek River, where they pulled the bus from the water 2 weeks earlier. The area was still roped off with yellow tape, but the deputies were gone. I parked off the road and slipped down the embankment. The water line had receded even more. You could see the deep rut in the earth where the bus had lodged itself into the muddy riverbed. The trees around the site swayed quietly. It was oddly still, too still. I stood in the exact spot where the rear wheels had been uncovered. I needed to feel it. I needed something real to grab onto, not whispers and theories and a name that shouldn't exist. That's when I noticed it. A long strip of sun-bleached fabric, snagged on a rusted fence post by the riverbank. It looked like part of a jersey. I approached slowly, heart pounding. I knelt and saw the edge of a number, 1. Lucas had worn number 9. I tugged it free and turned it over. No name on the back, just dirt, mold, and the unmistakable imprint of something once printed and since eroded. But the number was wrong, too low. Our team started numbers at 4. No one had been assigned single digits under that. I didn't know what I had found, but it wasn't from the official roster. Then I saw the footprint. Pressed deep into the mud, half erased by time and weather, but it wasn't the shape that got me, it was the size. Too small to be from any of the boys, but too large to be from a child. It was inhuman. I felt a chill roll up my spine. The air thickened, and I suddenly realized I hadn't heard a single bird or insect since arriving. I stuffed the jersey into my backpack and left fast, trying to keep my panic buried. I didn't look back. I couldn't. That night I sat in my motel room with every document, every photo, every scrap spread out on the bed. I studied the team photo again, counted the faces, 16. Then I did something I hadn't thought to do before. I looked closer, not at the players, but the reflections behind them in the trophy case glass. And there it was. A faint outline of a figure standing in the gym entrance. Faint, shadowed, but undeniably there, watching. Always watching. I enlarged the image on my laptop. The face was obscured, but something stood out, the posture. Rigid, unnatural, arms too long, neck too stiff. No identifying features, no facial expression, just presence. I was losing my grip. Was this paranoia? Was I projecting? I called Marcus Tilling, one of the 8 whose remains had been found in the bus. His mother, Judith, still lived 2 towns over. She agreed to meet with me the next morning, reluctantly. We met at a diner off I-80. Judith looked older than I remembered, but there was something steady in her eyes, worn but not broken. I always knew there was more to it, she said after I explained why I'd come. Marcus called me from the road that night, right before the game. She pulled out an old flip phone from her purse, the kind you'd expect to find in a museum, and scrolled to an old audio message. It's still saved. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe part of me knew one day someone would ask. She handed it to me. Marcus's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, laughing. Hey Ma, don't freak out, but there's this new kid with us. Says he's a transfer. Real quiet, pale, like weird pale. Doesn't blink much. Lucas is kind of freaked out. I think the coach doesn't even know his name. Anyway, see you after the win. The message ended. I sat there, stunned. Judith looked me dead in the eyes. They never told me that when I asked. The police said no new kid, said Marcus was just joking. I shook my head, he was. We sat in silence, then she added, almost too quietly. Did they ever find the others? 8 bodies, I said, 8 names. And how many bones? She asked, her voice cracking. I blinked. What do you mean? The coroner told me something back in 2004, she said, told me not to repeat it, but I never forgot. She reached into her purse and pulled out a copy of the original autopsy report, highlighted in yellow. Remains show signs of partial fusion, irregular skeletal growth, and non-standard joint structure. The official summary simply read, remains too degraded for confirmation. Marcus hadn't just died. He had changed. I left the diner shaken, questions spinning out of control. If what Judith said was true, if the bodies pulled from the river weren't entirely human anymore, then what really happened during that bus ride? And then I remembered something Coach Randall said. The others weren't themselves anymore. What if that wasn't just fear talking? What if it was literal? And what if Wesley Kerr wasn't just a passenger? What if he was the cause? The deeper I went, the less the town looked familiar. I returned to Mill Creek High the next morning, not to speak with staff, but to look at the field, the place where it all started, the final game that everyone celebrated before everything fell apart. The 2003 state championship had always been hailed as the school's greatest athletic achievement, but the more I looked into it, the more cracks I found. There were no surviving tapes of the match. No stats logged online. And strangest of all, no other school claimed to have played them that night. I called the Nevada State Athletic Association to confirm. The woman on the other end was helpful, polite, until I asked which team Mill Creek faced in the 2003 finals. Mill Creek, she repeated. They didn't qualify that year. I paused. Are you sure? Positive. They had a good season, but they lost in the regional semis. Finalists that year were Silver Ridge and Carson Heights. I hung up in stunned silence. Every newspaper in Mill Creek said the Wolves won the state title in 2003. The trophy was still on display. The banners still hung in the gym. But the game never happened. I drove straight back to the school, heart pounding. I marched into the gym, stood beneath the 2003 banner, and looked up at the photo hanging just below it, the same one I'd stared at so many times. Lucas in the middle, all 16 boys frozen in time. Only now I noticed something I hadn't before. The plaque didn't list the opposing team. No score. Just state champions, 2003. It was a lie. Fabricated, planted, or remembered wrong by everyone, I didn't know, but something was wrong, very wrong. I found Principal Darnell in her office. I didn't bother knocking. You said they won, I said, voice shaking. You told me they were state champions. You have banners in the gym, but the state doesn't have them on record. They didn't even qualify. She looked up from her desk, her face draining of color. I think you should leave, Ethan. No, I snapped. You knew, you've always known. Who put that banner up, who approved it? She stood slowly, hands trembling slightly. Get out, she whispered, before you dig up things that should stay buried. I stepped closer. What happened to Wesley Kerr? She froze. I saw his name on the roster, I said, but he's not in any records. The other players mentioned him. My brother did, and now I find out the game never even happened. She sat down hard, like her legs gave out. You don't understand, she whispered. It wasn't a game, it was a deal. Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. What kind of deal? She didn't speak at first, just stared at the floor like she was seeing something she'd been trying to forget for decades. It wasn't supposed to go that far, she murmured. We needed funding. The school was failing, low enrollment. We were going to lose accreditation. Then this man shows up, well-dressed, quiet, persuasive, said he could guarantee us a win, said he had a student, a transfer, who'd ensure victory. She swallowed hard. Said all we had to do was let him play. My heart was in my throat. Wesley. She nodded. We never checked his file, never saw his birth certificate. He showed up with paperwork already signed by the district superintendent. He trained once. No one could guard him. He was fast, inhumanly fast. Lucas hated him from the start. Of course he did. After the game, she continued, he vanished. No goodbyes, no transcript, just gone. And then the bus. She nodded, eyes glassy. We were told to lie, told it was an accident. They gave us the banner, the photos. We were told it would be enough. I asked. She just shook her head. I don't know who they were, but they came in suits, federal maybe, or something else. The room felt like it was shrinking. I left before she could say more. My mind was spiraling. Everything, the game, the bus, the bodies, the photo, the fear, it all pointed back to Wesley Kerr, a name that shouldn't exist, a figure that never belonged. Back in my motel room, I opened Lucas's old journal. I'd read it dozens of times. But this time something new caught my eye, an entry dated 2 days before the final game. It was short, just one line. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't breathe, he just watches. Number 1 isn't one of us. Number 1's. The missing jersey, the odd size, the one number never assigned. It was his. Wesley Kerr wasn't a player. He was the passenger. The first to board. And maybe the last to leave. The motel room walls were starting to close in on me. Every piece of evidence spread across the bed screamed a single truth I didn't want to admit. Wesley Kerr never existed. Not in any school record, not in the district files, not even in the state championship documentation, because, as I just discovered, that championship never happened. And yet, everyone remembered him. Even Lucas. Especially Lucas. The journal entry haunted me. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't breathe, he just watches. Number 1. The passenger that no one invited. I needed to see his face. That became an obsession, to put features to the silhouette in the Polaroid, the blur in the trophy case, the cold presence in everyone's memory, because something inside me was convinced, if I could just see his face, everything would make sense. I'd know what he was. Or maybe who. So I went to the library, the town archive 1 block off Main Street, tucked behind the old courthouse. The place smelled like old paper and Lysol. A single clerk sat behind the desk, scrolling on her phone. She barely looked up when I walked in. Yearbooks, I said. Mill Creek High, 2002, 2003, 2004. She pointed lazily toward a side room. There in the blue cabinet, bottom shelf. I dug them out, coughing through the dust. I started with 2003, flipped through every page, team photos, class lists, clubs, pep rallies, every student alphabetized by last name. No Kerr. No Wesley. But something weird happened when I reached the sophomore class spread. There was a blank space. A small square just big enough for a photo, printed over with a marbled gray filler. No name beneath it, no text, just emptiness, perfectly aligned where a student portrait should have been. My hands tingled. I grabbed a magnifying glass from the desk drawer and brought it close. The background behind the gray space didn't match the others. Every student portrait had a light blue backdrop. This one, it was darker, slightly off, like the photo had been burned out or deliberately removed after print. I moved to the next yearbook, 2002, freshman class, nothing, no blank spaces. Then 2004, again, nothing. Whoever Wesley Kerr was, he appeared in that one single year, and even then, not fully. I flipped back to the 2003 photo and ran my fingers along the edge of the page. Something was tucked between the sheets, thin, folded. I gently pulled it free. A page torn from a different book, some kind of printed schedule. At the top, Varsity Game Plan, March 2003. There were notes scribbled in blue pen, not Lucas's handwriting. I knew his letters by heart. These were tight, cramped, all caps. Not ready yet, needs more time. KEPS slipping, losing form. They're starting to notice. Below that, a name, WKERR. And next to it, one word, installed. I sat down hard, lungs aching. Installed like a program. Was he some kind of experiment? No too many assumptions. I had to stick to what I knew. Care had been added at the last moment. He didn't belong, and someone, maybe multiple people, knew he was unstable, that he was changing. But why? Why embed him into a high school soccer team? Why here? Why us? I left the library just before closing and drove straight to the coroner's office. I'd avoided it for days. I wasn't sure I could stomach seeing the files, but after what Marcus's mother said about the bones being not quite right, I needed to see them for myself. Dr. Ramona Ellis was on call that evening. She'd been the town's coroner since 2001. When I introduced myself and explained why I was there, she didn't blink. "I figured you'd come," she said, guiding me down the cold hallway. "Coach Randall called me last week, said you were digging." She unlocked a gray file cabinet, middle drawer. Inside were 8 folders. One for each set of remains we pulled from the bus. She handed me the one labeled Calhoun, Derek. I opened it slowly. Inside were x-rays, bone photos, and analysis reports. I flipped to the page marked skeletal abnormalities. Unusual cartilage thickening in joints. Spinal curvature inconsistent with age. Mandible development suggests subadult specimen, despite full adult dentition. And then, at the bottom, tissue samples unresponsive to standard chemical testing, DNA sequence unstable. I looked up, what does that mean? Dr. Ellis hesitated. I don't know, I ran the tests 3 times. Each time the samples degraded faster than they should have, like they were unraveling. Were the results shared? She shook her head. I submitted them to the state lab. 2 weeks later, I got a call saying the case was closed. They told me to destroy the samples. Did you? No. She walked to a locked mini freezer, keyed in a code, and removed a small vial. Derek's bone marrow, she whispered, still frozen, untouched since 2004. I stared at it. This wasn't just about a lost soccer team anymore. Someone had introduced something into our town, into our lives. And now it was unraveling all over again. Before I left, Dr. Ellis said something that chilled me to the core. You know how I knew something was off? I turned to her. No animal would go near the bus, she said softly. Not a single one, not in 18 years, like the whole riverbed was poisoned. I left the coroner's office with the vial in my pocket and dread in my chest. Whatever started in 2003 didn't end in the river. It was still here. And it was watching. By the time I returned to the motel, I felt like my entire past was under siege. The memories I had of Lucas, of the team, the season, the so-called championship, they weren't just unraveling, they were being replaced, or maybe overwritten. I stared at the vial from the coroner's office, still cold, still sealed, unstable DNA sequence. That phrase echoed in my head like a warning bell. Something about it sounded less medical and more designed. Who installs a teenager into a school, and for what purpose? I didn't sleep that night. At 5:30 a.m., I drove out to Hollow Ridge, a part of the county I hadn't visited since I was a kid. Back then, it was just trees and dirt roads, but I remembered one story. Lucas had once told me a teammate lived out there. A quiet kid, kept to himself, didn't speak much. His name? Emery Halstead. He'd been a junior that year, a substitute defender, barely played, survived because he'd been sick the night of the game, never boarded the bus. I tracked down the property, a 1-story house set back behind overgrown pines. The place looked abandoned. No mailbox, no lights, just a rusted truck in the driveway with 2 flat tires and moss eating the windshield. I knocked anyway. Nothing. I knocked again. And then I heard it, soft footsteps behind the door, a pause, then the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The man who opened the door looked nothing like I remembered, skinny, twitchy, pale as milk. He blinked 3 times before speaking. You're Lucas's brother. Not a question, a statement. I'm Ethan, I said. I think you were on the team. I wasn't on that bus. He stepped aside and waved me in. Inside, the house was eerily sterile. bare walls, folded towels stacked with surgical precision, windows taped shut with thick black garbage bags. The kitchen had a single plate, one spoon, and a full bottle of antipsychotics on the counter, unopened. Emery sat at the edge of his recliner, fingers tapping his knees. "You want to know about Wesley Kerr," he said. "They all come here eventually." "Who is they?" He didn't answer. "I found his name," I continued, "on the roster, on an old photo, even in Lucas's journal, but he's not in the yearbook, no school record. The game didn't even happen, Emery. The championship was a lie." He nodded slowly. "It wasn't a game, it was a field test." My stomach turned. "Field test for what?" Emery looked me dead in the eye. "For integration." He reached under the coffee table and pulled out a weathered spiral notebook, dozens of pages filled with diagrams, notes, phrases scrawled in all caps. Some of it looked scientific, other parts felt delusional. He flipped to a page near the back and held it up. At the top, W. Kerr observations, day 11. Does not blink unless prompted. Heart rate remains static during physical exertion. Smiles without context, mimics team speech, struggles with sarcasm. Eats but no waste. Sleeps on floor, eyes open. Dreams in another language. Others don't notice unless reminded, visual amnesia. Number on jersey shifts between sightings. I stared at him, you watched him. I documented him, Emery whispered. He wasn't just inserted into the team, he was learning from us, every interaction, every practice, every joke, every movement. He turned the page. A list of names, half crossed out. After the trip, the ones who went with him, they changed. If they came back, they weren't the same. If they stayed, they disappeared. 8 returned, 8 didn't, but they all went somewhere. I felt sweat forming at my collar. "Where?" He pointed to a page covered in overlapping circles. In the center, the interim. "A place between places," he muttered. "They called it that. I don't know what it means, but Wesley did. He talked about it sometimes. Said the bus was never meant to come back, that it did was a failure." "What about Lucas?" I asked, voice cracking. Emery closed the notebook. "He fought him, that's what I remember, the night before, in the locker room. Lucas confronted him, said he wasn't real, that he didn't belong, and Wesley smiled." I swallowed hard. "He said something I never forgot," Emery whispered. "He said, 'I don't need to belong, I just need to blend.'" That line sat heavy in the room. I asked if Emery had any proof. He stood up, walked into the next room, and returned with a VHS tape, handwritten label, MC Practice 31003. "It's grainy, but you'll see, he's there at first, and then." He didn't finish the sentence. I took the tape and stood to leave. At the door, I turned. "Why haven't you left town?" He smiled faintly, because they always find the ones who leave. That night, I borrowed an old VHS player from the library and set it up in the motel. I pressed play. The screen flickered, the team laughing, stretching, passing the ball, Lucas grinning, coach shouting drills. Then at the edge of the frame, Wesley. White jersey, number 1. He's standing still, watching the others. Then one by one, players move in front of him, and when they pass, he's gone. Frame by frame, he disappears, not walks away, not jogs off. He blinks out, like he was never there at all. I paused the video, heart racing, blood roaring in my ears. And then I heard it outside the window. 3 knocks. Even, steady, unmistakable. I turned slowly. And through the slit between the garbage bags and glass. A figure. Too tall. Too still. Watching. # chapter 9, the ones who remember. The knocks stopped. But the presence didn't. I stayed frozen by the window, breath locked in my throat. The figure didn't move. It didn't flinch. Just stood in the dark, beyond the glass, like it had all the time in the world. When I finally tore my eyes away and looked again, it was gone. I didn't sleep, I didn't even sit down. I stuffed the VHS back into my bag, threw everything into the car, and left that motel for good. I drove for hours without a destination, just movement. I needed distance. By morning, I pulled into a rest stop near the Nevada-Utah border. the same highway the team had taken in 2003, the same road where everything started. The parking lot was empty. I took out Lucas's journal again. I'd read it front to back so many times, but I kept coming back to one strange entry, one I'd skipped over before because it didn't make sense. Coach made us take a detour today, said it'd shave an hour off. Weird vibe out here. No signs, no towns, just dust. Feels like we're being watched. That wasn't on any public record. Official logs said the team drove Highway 50 straight from Carson City to Mill Creek. There was no detour. But Lucas remembered it. And that meant it mattered. I pulled up satellite maps, combed through rural routes and utility roads. After an hour, I found it, a stretch of unnamed road cutting through desert scrub, running parallel to the Pine Creek River, barely marked, decommissioned in 1998. A dead road. I drove there. The land was sun-blasted, silent, and unnatural. I followed the path until I found what I didn't even know I was looking for, a clearing. Large, oval-shaped, surrounded by brittle trees, and in the middle of it, a concrete foundation, cracked, overgrown, no building, just the imprint of something that had once stood there. A facility. I stepped out of the car, heart hammering. The wind shifted, dry and hot, and something smelled burnt. On the far edge of the concrete, half buried in dirt and debris, was a rusted metal sign. I wiped the dust off. Property of Carson Unified Research Initiative, CURI. Site 12B, decommissioned 2001. Research School District, an experiment tied to education. And then the word from Emery's notebook flashed in my mind, field test. This was where he came from. Wesley wasn't a student. He was a trial. I searched the ruins for an hour, finding nothing but old wiring and scraps of equipment too damaged to identify. But then, beneath a slab of cracked tile, I found a trapdoor. Metal bolted shut, but old. I pried it open with a tire iron from my trunk. It screamed as it lifted. Stairs led down into darkness. No way to explain it, but I knew this was the bus's destination. I descended slowly, flashlight in one hand, heart in the other. The air down there was different, denser, cold in a way that didn't feel natural, not from lack of sunlight, but like it had been sealed away from the world, a place meant to be forgotten. At the bottom, a single corridor. And 3 rooms. The first was a lab, broken desks, shattered glass, rusted tanks. On the far wall, scribbled in black marker. Integration is a function, not a choice. The second room had a long bench, lockers, jerseys hung on pegs, all of them numbered. But there was no number 1. And then the third room. My flashlight flickered as I opened the door. Rows of filing cabinets, dozens of them, all labeled. One caught my eye, WKERR, primary unit. I opened it. Inside, folders thicker than textbooks, files labeled with terms I didn't understand, neurological pliability, sensory mimicry, temporal retention limits. But the summary on the first page was terrifyingly clear. Project entry code 330-1A/subject, WCARE. Status, containment breach, 3/15/2003. Protocol, total narrative restructuring initiated. Notes, subject maintains autonomy. Integration attempts failed, reassigned to peripheral observation. Visibility inconsistent. Public recollection degrades upon distance from subject. I sat down hard on the floor. This was it, the truth. Wesley wasn't meant to be remembered. That's why records were missing. That's why no one could agree on his face. That's why he flickered out of video frames and photo reflections. He was still observing. And if the file was right, he never left. As I flipped through the final pages, I saw a list of student names, all the players from the 2003 team. Some had red marks beside them, some didn't. But at the bottom of the list was mine. ETHAN ROSS, access granted. My breath caught. I wasn't on that bus. I wasn't even on the team. How was I on this list? Then I saw the final note in the folder. Subject KERR requested ETHAN ROSS integration, post-termination of LUCAS ROSS. Observation incomplete. Narrative loop unstable. The pages trembled in my hands. He wasn't done with me. This wasn't a mystery I had chosen to solve. It was one I was meant to live. I climbed out of that bunker with my heart thundering in my chest, lungs burning with the taste of dust and dread. As soon as the desert air hit my face, I collapsed to my knees and stared up at the sky, not because I needed air, but because the world suddenly felt unreal, artificial. Narrative loop unstable. The words from the file rang in my head like a siren I couldn't shut off. What did they mean? Was my life part of the same test? Was I chosen, like Wesley had requested? And more terrifying than that, had everything I'd done since Lucas disappeared already been decided? I drove back toward town, but something about the road had changed. The trees seemed taller, closer. The air was thicker. My GPS stopped working. It wasn't until I passed the old water tower, the one that had been torn down in 2012, that I realized something was wrong. I pulled over and stared. It was standing tall, rusty, intact, like it was never removed. I got out of the car and stepped toward it. I remembered spray painting the words Lucas Lives on that tower in 2006. I remembered getting suspended for it, but as I circled to the south side, my legs almost gave out. The words were there. Fresh, unfaded, like I had just sprayed them that morning. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just uncovering a memory. I was in one. The trapdoor, the files, the exposure. Something had triggered the loop, or maybe I had entered it without realizing, retracing too many steps, asking too many questions, and now I wasn't in the present anymore. I was in his version of it. Wesley's loop. Back in Mill Creek, the town was quieter than usual. People moved slower. Faces looked off. Not wrong, just disconnected, like actors playing a role they didn't fully understand. I walked into Darnell's office at the school. She looked up at me and smiled. Welcome back, Ethan. Her voice was calm, too calm. How did you know I was coming? We've been expecting you, she said. I looked around the office. Something was different. The photos on the wall had changed. Lucas wasn't in the team photo anymore. I stepped closer and scanned every face. 16 players, including Wesley, smiling front and center. My hands began to shake. I turned to her. You said you didn't remember him. She tilted her head. I never said that. I backed out of the office and ran down the hall. The lights buzzed overhead. The gym was open. I ran inside. The 2003 banner still hung from the rafters, only now it had a new name on it. Most Valuable Player, Wesley Kerr. A chill spread through my spine. I left the school in a sprint. My car was gone. I didn't remember parking it, didn't remember turning off the engine. My phone had no signal, no time. No date. Everything was coming apart. Or maybe I was. I ran to the only place I still trusted, my childhood home. It had been vacant since Mom moved away, but I knew where the spare key was. The door creaked open. The inside was exactly how we left it. Family photos. Lucas's trophies. The smell of old cereal and dust. And then I saw it, the journal, lying open on the table. But I had that in my bag. I picked it up slowly, the same cover, the same crease in the corner. But a different message inside. Written in Lucas's handwriting, but not his words. You were never meant to leave, Ethan. You were always part of this. Wesley chose you. Now choose him. I dropped the book. Footsteps echoed from upstairs. Heavy. Measured. I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a fireplace poker, and crept toward the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight. The air smelled like mildew and old rain. At the top of the landing, the hallway stretched longer than it should. The house wasn't that big. But the hallway just kept going. And at the end, a door was open. Light spilling out. I walked toward it, heart pounding, grip white-knuckled around the iron poker. And in the room, Lucas's room, he was sitting on the bed. My brother. just like I remembered him. Same hoodie, same smirk, same tired eyes. "Hey," he said, as if nothing had happened. I didn't move. "Lucas." He nodded. I took a step closer. "You died." "No," he said, "I stayed." My throat closed. "What do you mean?" He looked past me, toward the hallway behind. "You left, but not far enough. You came back. That's how he knows you're ready." "Ready for what?" "To finish the loop." I stepped back. "I'm not finishing anything. I'm ending this." Lucas stood taller than I remembered, too tall. His arms hung low. His smile twitched too wide. That's when I knew. This was Lucas. This was the role Wesley had left behind. A placeholder. A memory with a voice. I ran down the stairs, out the door. The sky was dark now, but not night, just wrong. The clouds had no shape, the light had no source, and the street was gone. No trays. No buildings. Just one bus. Parked in front of the house. Engine running. The door creaked open. And from inside, a voice. Familiar. Monotone. Gentle. "We've saved your seat, Ethan." I stood there, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, the world around me dissolving into something that felt like a memory, but wasn't mine. The bus sat in perfect stillness. Its paint was still chipped and rusted. The Mill Creek Wolves logo barely clung to the side. The engine idled, soft and steady, like it had never stopped since 2003. And the door was open. Inside, shadows moved. Or maybe they waited. I wanted to run. Every part of my body screamed at me to turn around, to disappear into whatever sliver of real world might still exist beyond this loop. But I couldn't. Not because of curiosity. Because of Lucas. If there was any piece of him left, it was on that bus. I stepped forward. The first thing that hit me was the cold, not air conditioning, the cold of a place untouched by time, stale, unnatural, like the air didn't belong to this world. The floor creaked beneath me and I scanned the seats. Empty, but not forgotten. The names of the missing were scratched into the metal above each row, faint, etched by fingernails or knives. Calhoun, Tilling, Wells, Price. And then halfway down, the seat marked Ross. My last name. But not mine's. Lucas's. I reached out and touched the back of his seat. It was warm. And then I heard it, the faintest inhale, like breath returning to lungs long gone. I turned. The bus wasn't empty anymore. The aisle was full. Boys. All of them. The missing players. Sitting still, eyes forward, jerseys faded, faces half remembered, and in the very back, in the same position he always took, Wesley Kerr. Only now he had a face. It was mine. Not entirely, slightly off, like someone trying to draw me from memory and getting it just wrong enough to feel monstrous. He smiled, tilted his head, and spoke in my voice. "You never left the field, Ethan. You've just been watching from the wrong side." I stumbled back, heart in my throat, breath tearing out of me. "What are you?" I gasped. He stood, all the others turning their heads in unison, watching me, not blinking. "A question," he said, "and an answer, the thing that doesn't fit, the player who learns by becoming, the story that survives by changing its narrator." My knees buckled. "You took them." "No, they came with me. They knew what the game was." Lucas knew. I shook my head. "He fought you." "And you've done better?" he asked, stepping closer. "You followed the path. You opened every door. You finished the story." "No," I tried to scream it, but my voice cracked. He raised a hand. "It's all right. You were meant to. Every loop needs a new voice." The light on the bus flickered. And then I saw it, not a reflection, not a trick me, seated halfway down, just a boy again, 15, back when Lucas still ruffled my hair and called me kid. I saw myself smile. I saw myself watch the others. I saw myself forget. Wesley, or whatever he was, stepped aside. "It's your seat now, Ethan. We've all had a turn. Some of us stay longer. Some of us leave marks." He lined in clothes. You lave the deepest ones. My fingers trembled as I reached for the handle of the bus door. Outside, the sky was blank. No stars, no moon, just quiet. I took a breath, and I stepped off the bus. They found me a week later, wandering the edge of Pine Creek, barefoot, dehydrated, muttering plays from a game that never happened. They asked questions. I gave them a story. They smiled, nodded, wrote it down, and never printed a word. The bus was gone again. The water had risen. The town moved on. But sometimes late at night, when the fog rolls in just right, I see it at the edge of the road. Lights on, engine running. Waiting. Because the loop never ends. It just waits for the next player to remember they were part of it all along.